Somewhere in the world right now, an engine is running that was built before your parents were married. No rebuild, no restoration, just oil changes, maybe some neglect, and 30 or 40 years of mornings where someone turned a key and it started without complaint. That engine exists. More than one of them does. And the story of how they got there, the decisions made in engineering rooms, the obsessions of men who refused to accept good enough, is one of the most quietly extraordinary stories in the history of the automobile. These are the engines that refused to die, and we're going to tell you exactly why. The year is 1983. Toyota calls a meeting. Not a product planning meeting. Not a quarterly review. They call together 1,400 engineers and 2,300 technicians and give them a single instruction: build the finest automobile ever made. Spare nothing. Cut no corners. If the answer is more expensive, use the more expensive answer. They call the project F1, not Formula One, flagship number 1. And at the center of it, the beating heart of this obsession, would be an engine unlike anything Toyota had ever built. They looked at aircraft engineering, not for inspiration, for standards. The tolerances used inside jet engines, the material specifications, the testing protocols. They applied them to a car engine. The casting walls were made thick enough to survive stresses that would split other V8s in half. The crankshaft was clamped by 6 main bolts per journal, an almost unheard of number, because they wanted that crankshaft held with a grip that time itself couldn't loosen. When the 1UZ V finally arrived inside the 1989 Lexus LS400, the automotive press ran out of words. It was the quietest V8 anyone had ever heard, smoother than anything from Stuttgart or Munich. Toyota's launch event featured a pyramid of champagne glasses balanced on the running hood, 12 rows tall, not a single one tipping. It wasn't a trick. It was just the engine doing what it was designed to do. In the decades since, that engine has covered 1 million miles in real-world documented use without a single mechanical failure. 1 million. The number sounds invented. It isn't. It is simply what happens when a company decides to build something properly, once, without compromise, and never looks back. Now forget perfection for a moment. Forget champagne pyramids and aviation tolerances and engineering budgets with no ceiling. Come with me to a different world entirely, to a taxi dispatch lot in Queens at 3 in the morning where a cab that has run 400,000 miles is being handed to its third driver of the day. Nobody designed the Ford Crown Victoria for glory. Nobody at Ford sat down in 1990 and tried to build an icon. They tried to build something that would start every morning regardless of what the previous driver had done to it. Something that could idle for 6 hours in a traffic jam and not care. Something a mechanic with 15 minutes and a parts budget could fix with his eyes half open. The engine they used, the 4.6-litre Modular V8, 2 valves per cylinder, iron block, was by any technical measure unremarkable. 1 camshaft per bank. No variable timing. No turbocharger adding heat and complexity and eventual expense. Just a simple, heavy, honest pushrod adjacent design that knew exactly what it was and never pretended otherwise. What that engine did in the real world was nothing short of remarkable. Police departments ran them to 500,000 miles. Taxi fleets in cities that never sleep put 3 drivers and 22 hours a day through them and couldn't kill them. Fleet mechanics across America developed a fondness for this engine that bordered on affection. Because in a career full of surprises, the Ford 4.6 was the engine that never surprised you. It didn't need to be brilliant. It only needed to be there. And it always was. There is a version of Mercedes-Benz that no longer exists. It existed in the 1990s and into the early 2000s, and if you were lucky enough to own one of those cars, an S-Class, a G-Wagon, an E55 with the naturally aspirated V8 under the hood, you know exactly what has been lost. You know it because you still drive it, because it has 250,000 miles on it and you have no intention of replacing it with anything made after 2010. The engine responsible for that loyalty is the M113. And it was built on two ideas so simple they almost sound naive. The first, 3 valves per cylinder, 2 for intake, 1 for exhaust. Not the 4-valve setup that most performance engines chased for maximum power. 3, because 3 gave you enough airflow without the additional complexity that 4 valves demand. Every moving part you don't add is a moving part that can never fail. The second idea was the one that truly set this engine apart. 2 spark plugs per cylinder, not for power, for cleanliness. When you ignite the fuel charge from 2 points simultaneously, the combustion is so complete, so thorough, that the carbon deposits that slowly strangle modern engines simply cannot accumulate. The cylinders stay clean. The combustion stays consistent across 50,000 miles, 100,000, 200,000. The engines that replaced the M113 were more powerful, more efficient, turbocharged, twin-turbocharged, with sophisticated management systems controlling every millisecond of their operation. They were extraordinary machines in many ways. They also had timing chain issues before 100,000 miles, coolant leaks that required the front of the engine to come apart, repair bills that made people quietly look up the value of their car before deciding whether to fix it. The M113 had none of that. It just ran. Clean and honest and unbothered by the decades piling up around it. Ask any farmer in Nebraska what engine he wants in his truck, and he won't say anything about horsepower figures or 0 to 60 times. He'll say, "I want the one that starts in January." In 1999, General Motors put an engine in their half-ton trucks that the automotive press called old-fashioned. They weren't wrong. The Vortec 5.3 used pushrods, a valvetrain design that dates to the earliest days of the internal combustion engine, with a single camshaft buried low in the block, pushing rods upward to operate the valves. No overhead camshafts. No timing chains stretched between distant components. Just pushrods, doing what pushrods have always done, reliably and without complaint. The people who called it old-fashioned were correct. They were also completely missing the point. Every component that doesn't exist cannot fail. The Vortec's simplicity wasn't an oversight. It was a philosophy. Keep the moving parts count low. Make the oil pump strong enough to keep working when the oil is old and dirty and overdue for a change. Make the iron block thick enough that heat and pressure and the daily insult of a hard-working life never add up to a crack. 300,000 miles became routine. 400,000 became a story worth telling at the dealership. The million-mile examples became legend, not 1 or 2 of them, but enough that truckers started calling it the million-mile motor, because enough of them had seen it done to believe it wasn't an accident. Right now, on a farm somewhere in the middle of this country, there is a Silverado that should have been retired a decade ago. The paint has surrendered to the sun. The interior is held together by determination. The bed has a dent in it from something nobody remembers. The engine started this morning, it will start tomorrow morning. It has never given its owner a single reason to doubt it. That is not old-fashioned. That is exactly the point. Everything we've talked about so far was engineered to be reliable. Teams of people, budgets, testing programs. Deliberate decisions made by smart engineers who understood exactly what they were building and why. This last one is different. The Chrysler 318 was not engineered for immortality. It was engineered in 1967 to be adequate, to move a station wagon down the road without embarrassing anyone, to cost the right amount to build and make sense in a car that most people bought because they needed to carry the whole family somewhere. Nobody called it the cockroach back then. That name came later after the decades started accumulating and it became clear that this engine had something the expensive ones didn't: a stubborn, unkillable indifference to suffering. Its tolerances were loose. Modern engineers would look at the specifications and wince slightly. But loose tolerances meant that dirty oil, low-quality fuel, missed service intervals, a decade sitting under a tarp in someone's backyard, none of it mattered enough to stop the engine. Where a precise modern engine needs everything to be right, the 3AN could work with whatever it had. It converted neglect and abuse into noise and heat and kept moving. Chrysler built it until 2002. 35 years. The core design barely changed because there was nothing that needed changing. It simply worked, in the way that the simplest things sometimes work best, not because of brilliance, but because of a fundamental rightness that no amount of progress ever made obsolete. When someone pulls a tarp off an old Mopar in a field and turns the key and it starts, the people watching always laugh with a kind of surprised delight. They shouldn't be surprised anymore, but they always are. 5 engines. 5 completely different philosophies. 1 Japanese flagship built with unlimited budget and aerospace ambition. 1 American workhorse designed specifically to be forgotten and never fail. 1 German masterpiece from an era before cost-cutting discovered Stuttgart. 1 truck motor so simple it became indestructible by accident. And 1 cockroach that survived everything because it was never complicated enough to be fragile. What they share is not technology. It is not a common design feature or a shared engineering approach. What they share is this: every one of them was built for the world as it actually is. Imperfect, demanding, neglectful, relentless, rather than the world as it looks on a specification sheet. The fastest engines get the magazine covers. The most powerful engines get the TV commercials. But the engines in this story got something rarer and more lasting than any of that. They got the quiet, unshakable trust of the people who depended on them. And that trust, once earned the way these engines earned it, lasts longer than almost anything else in this industry. It lasts about 1,000,000 miles.